feel well rested. As a new parent, I envy those of you all who are getting good sleep right now. But we all like to get good rest. We like to wake up in the morning and feel rested. We don't like it when our sleep is interrupted. And a lot of money is put into sleep research in order to figure out what the best bed, the best pillow, the best position is. And then there's sleep studies you can do to find out what it is, what the best item of all those items for you. You can go to different places and they'll watch you sleep. And you can get a very personalized sleep plan. And we do all of this money is spent because we know that rest is important. In fact, it's not just rest at night that's good for us. We also like to take breaks from whatever we're working on. We like vacations. We go off on vacations in order to rest, to recharge. And maybe if we don't go somewhere, we stay in town and we do what we call a staycation. We like the idea of just taking a break, getting away from it all in order to take some rest. In fact, they've done studies that show employees who take a 5 to 10 minute break to go for a walk or just to step away are happier employees, therefore more productive, therefore more efficient, and more committed to the company. And if you think about it, that kind of makes sense, because if you got an employee that is just go, go, go all the time, never slows down, never takes a break, they get cranky. They're going to bring down the work environment because they're cranky around their employees, and they're going to be much more susceptible to burnout. Taking time for rest is important. And in fact, tomorrow is Labor Day, which before it was the holiday that marked the end of summer and the day when you could no longer wear white, past that day, it marked a period, or it was to honor the laborer, honor the worker for working. And so it was designated to be a day to take some rest and celebrate the hard work you've done. And so today I want us to talk about the importance of taking some time for rest. But we're not talking about physical rest. I don't want us to talk about the importance of getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep every night. I want us to talk about the importance of getting spiritual rest. And it's not resting from going to church. It's not resting from reading our Bible. It's not resting from prayer. If anything, it's quite the opposite, this spiritual rest. There's a book out called The Celebration of Discipline, or Celebration of Disciplines by Richard J. Foster. In the book, he talks about 12 different spiritual disciplines that Christians can practice. And this isn't discipline as in punishment, but this is discipline as an exercise, or something you do for the purpose of training. You are disciplined in something. You do it for the purpose of growth and improvement. And so he talks about 12 different spiritual disciplines. In fact, I would encourage you to read the book sometime, especially in connection to what we talked about last Sunday night when we talked about spiritual fire, not being stagnant in our faith. But it's practicing these disciplines can prevent being stagnant in your faith. And one of the disciplines he talks about in this book is the discipline of solitude, or the discipline of silence. And when we practice solitude, we find this period of inner peace, or this period of rest, where it's not a physical rest where we fall asleep, but a rest from all the noise that is in our world, and we take some time to simply be still. You can open your Bibles to Genesis chapter 1. We're kind of going to be looking at a variety of different verses, so you'll want to get your fingers ready to turn pages or fingers to click if you're using a digital Bible. Genesis chapter 1. We know the story. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. In the beginning, we get this sense that there was God. And there was God. God creates everything in the creation account here. But you get this image of silence before the world was created. There was peace. There was stillness. With God, there is this peace and tranquility. That's who God is. In God, there is found peace. That is the nature of God. But we know the creation story that in 6 days, God creates everything. And then something special happens on that seventh day. Jump down to verse 31. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. God created everything in 6 days, and then it says on that seventh day he rested and then made it holy. Not only do we have God creating everything in our world, but God also creates this thing called rest. And he makes a special designation that rest is important, because he makes this seventh day holy. And God takes this idea of rest a step further in Exodus chapter 20, when he gives the law to the Israelites. Exodus 20, verse 8, "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns." Nobody is to work. "For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." God created the world in 6 days, rested on the seventh, and then he issues a command: remember the Sabbath. God instructs the Israelites that the Sabbath day that was inspired from God's creation of the world, that just as God rested on the seventh day, his people are to rest also. And it's to be a day that's dedicated to God. Now, Jesus will later tell the Pharisees that God didn't create the Sabbath for himself, but he created it for his people. It's designed to take time for rest, take time to rest from work. Leviticus 23:3, verse 3, "There are 6 days when you may work, but the seventh day is a day of Sabbath rest, a day of sacred assembly. You are not to do any work wherever you live. It is a Sabbath to the Lord." It was a day of rest and a day of sacred assembly. It was a day to worship God, where you put your focus on God instead of focusing on work. Now, us as Christians, we don't have a Sabbath like that in the old law, and we don't have any set rules for us on what is considered work and what we can do and can't do on the Sabbath. But many times you might hear Sunday as referred to as the Christian Sabbath. It's a day of rest and worship. But there's other times and other examples in the New Testament of taking time out of the week for rest. And not just rest, but solitude. Spending quiet time with God. A very common example of this is found in Matthew chapter 4. Matthew chapter 4. We're actually going to finish at the end of chapter 3. And so Matthew chapter 3, this is the first time adult Jesus comes into the picture in Matthew's account. He's baptized by John, and we'll pick it up in verse 16. It It says, as soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water, and at that moment heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, this is my Son, whom I love, with him I am well pleased. Starting in chapter 4, it says, then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. Then the tempter came to him. Jesus is baptized, and before he begins his ministry, he spends 40 days alone in the desert fasting. Now, fasting is another spiritual discipline that we could save for another time. But Jesus begins his ministry, and then before he even calls his first disciples, he spends time alone. But that's not the only time we have recorded that Jesus spent time alone. Mark chapter 1, verse 35 says, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Many times we're told that Jesus went to a place by himself to pray. Even Jesus, the Son of God, recognized that it was important and crucial for him to pull away from it all and spend time alone in prayer. Mark chapter 6, verse 31, then because so many people were coming and going, they did not even have a chance to eat. He said to them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. Here Jesus takes his disciples and teaches them the act of going to a quiet place and getting rest. Jesus is teaching his disciples, teaching them the value and the importance of that rest. Luke chapter 5, verse 15, yet the news about Jesus spread all the more, so that crowds of people came to him and to be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. It says he often withdrew. That it was not just a one-time thing to check it off the list and say, all right, I got that solitude, what's next on the to-do list? But it says he often, it was a regular practice. In fact, I almost kind of wonder if the disciples might have been waking up one morning, wondering where Jesus was, and if they kind of wondered, oh, I know where Jesus is. He's praying. That reminds me, I need to take that time to also go pray. Luke chapter 6, verse 12 says, one of those days Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. When morning came, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them, whom he also designated apostles. In this section, before Jesus chooses his 12 apostles and begins his ministry, he spends the night in prayer to God. Before he begins on this ministry and choosing the 12 individuals who will follow him for the next 3 years, before he makes this big life change or this big important decision, he spent the night in prayer. Whether it be for rest or to start his ministry, or before he made a decision, Jesus continually went to a quiet place to pray. Rest is important. And tonight we've been talking about a spiritual rest that can only come from God. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 9, it says, there remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest so that no one will perish by following their example of disobedience. The author in Hebrews is writing about this rest, this entering God's rest, which we know the ultimate rest to be heaven. That is the end ultimate goal, that ultimate rest. But there's also a rest here on earth that we can participate in, that we can experience that rest and peace that comes from solitude in God, where we follow the example of Christ, where he very often went to a solitude place to pray, to be alone with God. we need to follow that example. Because the true rest only comes from God. Psalm 23. I just want to read these next few Psalms, verses from these Psalms. And so I just want you to listen. Psalm 23, we all know it fairly well. It says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul." Psalm 62. "Truly my soul finds rest in God. My salvation comes from Him. Truly He is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress, and I will never be shaken." Psalm 73, verse 26. "My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever." There is rest and strength in God. That's where we want to be. That's what we want to strive for. And so we want to rest. And in order to accomplish this rest, we're talking about practicing solitude. Practicing being silent. Where we personally are silent, and then we also strive to be in an environment that is silent. Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 2. I think a good reminder for all of us. It says, "Do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God is in heaven and you are on earth. So let your words be few." Words of wisdom, to speak less. God is Lord in heaven and we are humans on earth. We need to constantly remember that we don't need to be talking. In fact, more often we need to be quiet and maybe let God speak to us. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 7, this is when he's saying a time to do this, a time to do that. It says, a time to be silent and a time to speak. There's a time to speak, yes, but there's also a time to be silent. We don't always have to be the one talking. And in fact, we shouldn't. And we probably need to listen more often than we're talking. That's good advice for relationships here on earth, but it's even better advice for a relationship with God. To listen more often than talking. But it's also important that we find a silent place. A place where we can go where it is quiet. We live in a world with so much noise. Everyone in our world wants to be heard. Everyone wants to share their opinion or thoughts, or everyone wants to have a voice. It's a loud world. We've got television shows, the news, Netflix, Hulu, YouTube, movies, music, Pandora, Spotify, radio, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, and if you don't even know what some of those are, don't worry about it. There's social media. Have you ever noticed how loud it can be on social media? You go to any news feed and you just scroll through, and it's not loud as in noise, but it's almost visually loud. You scroll through the news feed and you've got people talking about their day, showing off their sandwich, people complaining about Trump, people supporting Trump, people sharing a video complaining or supporting Trump, people sharing a recipe about some food they'll probably never make, someone showing that their Farmville animal just died, someone showing pictures from their trips, someone sharing a video about their dog. It goes on and on. Social media can be great. There's a lot of value in it, but it can also be really noisy. And in this noisy world, we have to take time to be silent and rest with God our Father. And so since tomorrow is Labor Day, I want to encourage us all to do something. It's not a challenge, because I think challenge, if I was to say, I'm going to challenge you with this, it sounds like something you do one time never to do again, or something that's maybe difficult, or something that, you probably don't want to do this. And so I want to encourage you with something. Sometime tomorrow, take 15 to 30 minutes, find a quiet place, and just be silent and rest in God's presence. Take your physical Bible with you, not your phone, because I don't want us to get distracted with notifications or text messages that pop up. Take your physical Bible, leave the phone in the house, leave the phone in the other room, and read it. Maybe you don't read it for the whole time. Maybe you only read one verse, but you read it over and over. Meditate on it. Think about how it applies to your life. Sit in silence. Let God's word speak to you. Spend time in a quiet place in prayer. Unplug. Remove all distractions and be with God. Now, you may have to adjust your daily schedule a little bit. You may even have to get up a little earlier so that you can make time for this. But I'm going to encourage all of us, myself included, to spend 15 to 30 minutes tomorrow practicing solitude and finding rest in God on this Labor Day. We all want rest. We all need rest. And we're not just talking about physical rest. We all want and need that spiritual rest. And we can only find that true spiritual rest through a relationship with Jesus Christ. If you haven't gotten to experience that true rest, and if you want to experience that rest, enter into a relationship with Christ by being baptized, forgiven of your sin, and experiencing that peace from God, then we want to help you. If we can help you in any way, please come now as we stand and sing.